Yo, you there? Are you there? The topic, guys, the topic of this video, guys, is going to be about the problem of suffering and evil. This is something I've been dealing with for a few weeks now, for a couple months now, man. This is something that's going to be very, very important. So the topic of this video, guys, is going to be about the problem of suffering and evil and all that type of stuff. The problem of suffering and evil. This is something I've been kind of dealing with for quite a while now. I've been dealing with this type of issue. It's like a type of it's like a philosophical dilemma. I've been dealing with it for quite some time now. The problem of evil and suffering and all that type of stuff. That is something that I've been kind of like pondering about, thinking about very deeply and carefully for a couple of weeks now, man. For almost been like months as well. And the problem of suffering and evil. This is, in a nutshell, basically in a nutshell. Like, if God exists, like, why is there so much like bad stuff happening in the world? Why is there so many like natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, kids that starve to death in different parts of the world, disease and all that type of stuff, and pain in general and suffering? Where does all of that, why did like if you think about it, it's like, especially as it like relates to the Abrahamic faiths, that if God is like all knowing, all caring, all loving, why would he create like so much like pain and suffering? Basically, that's kind of like, in a nutshell, that's what the problem of suffering and evil is about. It's kind of like a philosophical dilemma. Basically, if God is like good and etc and stuff like that, then why is there like so many different sorts of bad things happening in the world? Why would an all loving, caring, benevolent God allow for like pain and suffering and other types of evils, including natural disasters? And this is like such a difficult it's such a difficult thing to it's like a type of philosophical dilemma. It's so hard to solve this type of issue, man. How do you really come about to solving this? It's so difficult because of the fact that because especially it relates specifically to the Abrahamic faith. How can an all-powerful, capable, loving, caring God deliberately like allow for like so much like suffering and pain? And if some people would say it's because of free will. That is like the most common like sort of like that's basically like one of the biggest like kind of counter arguments to the whole thing about the problem of suffering and evil, is basically that it's all about like free will. That God gave us free will, and hence some people do choose to do bad things of their own free will. And this type of counter argument to the problem of suffering and evil is a little bit dubious. The reason why it's a little bit dubious is because I don't even, honestly, if you read through the Bible, and if you specifically read through the Quran as well, and you understand a little bit about like Islamic theology, you'd realize that the problem like free will is kind of like a little bit nonsensical. That you'd come to the realization that free will doesn't really exist, at least in my opinion, from what I did from my like careful research and stuff like that, and studying of the Bible and the Quran and stuff like that. You'd come to the realization that free will, at least in my opinion, I don't think that we as human beings, we have like just such a tremendous amount of free will. I think there a lot of things are determined actually. But anyway, that is like, the problem of suffering and evil. This obviously relates to the Abrahamic faith. If there's like an all-loving, all-caring, good God that controls everything, why do so many messed up things happen? Why is there like so much pain and suffering and stuff? And like, it's kind of, so again, the counter argument that people present is like, it's all about free will. That's why God allows for all that pain and suffering. Even though to me, this is like such a weak counter argument. I'll tell you why. Because like, there's so many different sorts of like things like pain and suffering. It's not just because of, it isn't only relate to us human beings, like, and our agency and our actions and our decisions. Like, think about like natural disasters, for example, or like kids being born with genetic health issues and problems and stuff like that. And even in the Bible, God he specifically in the Bible, he commands for genocide as well. If you read through the Bible, especially like one of the best examples to use is like Noah's flood. Basically, is where the biblical God like just wipes out all of like humanity and a couple animals as well, and all sorts of like organisms and creatures on the planet in Noah's flood. And he does that deliberately, and that's God choosing to like exterminate like life and cause like untold amounts of suffering because he decides that is like the best course of action to do. So it's like the problem of suffering and evil. It's not just about like us human beings. We choose to do bad things. That's kind of a little bit naive. Some people, that's what a lot of people, that's their counter argument to the whole problem of suffering and evil. is that we choose, like we deliberately, like of our own free will, we choose to do bad things, and that's why pain and suffering exists. And that's kind of very naively stupid, like that type of counter argument, because you're only taking into account like moral, like things to do with us human beings. There's also like natural disasters as well, which cause like pain and suffering. There's all these other like sorts of like issues as well, that it's not just about us human beings. We choose to be bad or whatever, we choose to like commit crime or whatever and stuff like that. It's not just about our agency and our own actions. There's like so much like pain and suffering that's beyond our control and stuff, and that's really where that is like at the heart of like where that's where the problem of evil and suffering, that's where it really like kind of breaks down to. That's where it really strongly relates to, like if God is like all good and all loving and caring and all that type of stuff, how come like there's so much like unlike pain and suffering? And some people again would say it's because it's our free will and all that type of stuff. Is we choose to do like certain bad things, we of our own free will we choose to do bad things, and that's what results in the suffering and pain. It's because of our own free will. Obviously, that fair enough, that makes a little bit of sense for like some of like the pain and suffering, but there's a lot of pain and suffering that's beyond our own control, certainly natural disasters and etc and stuff like that. And also if you read through the Bible and the Quran, the Abrahamic God, he kind of instigates the suffering as well. If you look at the Bible, there's like a lot of places in the Bible where the biblical God actually commands for genocide, and he conducts a genocide himself. Like think about Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the type of like those types of situations and scenarios. That's like where God was instigating, causing like suffering deliberately. It wasn't because of the fault of the humans in those like scenarios and stories. So even like in the Bible, God is like instigating, causing suffering on purpose as well. Also Isaiah 45:7, God creates pain and evil. So it's kind of like, to me, take a look at that trolley, man. There's like a little trolley in the distance. So freaky, man. Like a little trolley there. But guys, if you think about this so carefully, the problem of suffering and the problem of evil, really suffering's like the problem of suffering. I think that's what's really a lot more appropriate. Even though typically it's called the problem of evil. It's called the problem, like in most like in most discussions, people would term it like problem of evil, but I think it's actually more to do with like the problem of suffering, guys. Why is there like a lot of like suffering and pain? That's what it's really about, guys. Not just like evil. Some like a lot of like people, religious people, they'll tell you that, well, how would you define evil then anyway? How do you, some I know like William Lane Craig, also that guy Ravi Zacharias or whatever, he said that basically, how can you determine evil? Like you need God to determine evil, so how the problem of evil is kind of nonsensical. Actually, it's more to do with the problem of suffering and pain. Why is there like so much suffering and pain in the world? That's actually a lot more appropriate in my opinion. Evil is a little bit dubious, and I do agree with Ravi Zacharias. I actually seen like a clip of him, and he was talking about the fact that, well, in order to define evil and good, you need God for that, and basically, so the problem of evil is kind of nonsensically stupid without God. I agree with that to some extent, but like still, there's so much like pain and suffering. That's really what it's about, not just evil. That's kind of a little bit dubious. Really, the problem of like pain and suffering, that to me is like there's like some people say that again, the free will argument. That's like the biggest counter argument to the problem of like evil, really pain and suffering. That basically, God gave us like free will, and certain people choose to do bad. Certain people, they use their free will to do bad, other people use their free will to do good. Basically, evil, pain and suffering exists because of like evil. Pain and suffering and evil exist because of the fact that we as human beings, we have free will, and hence that is like as a natural consequence of us having free will, some of us are going to choose to do bad things to each other. And that really, but more about natural disasters, kids being born with like genetic health problems and all that other stuff, man. And even like if you look at the if you read through the Bible, in the Bible, it's even like mentioned the fact that it's even mentioned in the Bible that God actually, if you look at the Bible very carefully, God actually causes pain and suffering deliberately. Look at Noah's flood. Look at 1 Samuel 15:3, where the biblical God commands for genocide, tells the Israelites to kill the Amalekites. So that type of free will argument becomes nonsensically stupid. Because obviously, certainly, we do bad things to each other, obviously, fair enough. But there's like natural disasters, genetic health problems and issues, things beyond our own free will. So like, well, where does all that come into this? It becomes kind of dumb, doesn't it? So that is kind of like the problem of like evil, really pain and suffering. That is like such a difficult philosophical dilemma to try and solve. I know like a lot of Christians and stuff like that, they'll tell you that, oh, well, it's because of the fact that free will, and you need God to define evil to begin with. So that kind of, the problem of evil is kind of nonsensical and stupid. I think that's what what's his name, Ravi Zacharias, he said that actually. He actually said that because of the fact that you can't really define evil anyway, you need like God to define evil, so that the problem of evil is kind of self-defeating. That's obviously fair enough, but still, like, let's just call it the problem of pain and suffering. How do you explain all the pain and suffering, man? It's very, very difficult. Some people, like, obviously free will is like a good counter argument, but there's like a lot of things that are beyond our own free will, like natural disasters, genetic health problems and issues like that, and cancer and all that. How do you explain all of that? How do you explain like all the pain and suffering in the Bible caused by the Abrahamic God? Specifically, like, if you read through the Bible, like, let's look at Noah's flood, look at Sodom and Gomorrah, all of these like stories and scenarios, that's all because of like the fact that the Abrahamic biblical God, he deliberately instigated those genocides and like atrocities using his own like omnipotent, omniscient knowledge. He decided that the best course of action in those situations and scenarios was to like command for genocide, conduct genocide, which is kind of so funny and ironic. That if you look at the Bible specifically, there's like the biblical God himself conducts genocides. Isn't that kind of funny? The Egyptian newborns, he actually called like a lot of Christians and Jews, they actually don't know this, and Muslims as well, but the Abrahamic God literally kills like babies, children as well. It's kind of funny, women and men as well. Literally, like, look at like the fact that like the in Egypt, like, following like the story of like Moses in Egypt, the newborn Egyptian children were like getting killed, infanticide, conducted by the Abrahamic God. So how do you explain that? How do you explain Sodom and Gomorrah and Noah's flood and all these like massive like amounts of like atrocities and genocides? Honestly, you can't explain it at all. It's like so like weirdly messed up and stuff like that, man. How do you explain it? It's so weird. How do you explain like some people say that it's because of like free will, that's why pain and suffering exists. That to me is like a cop-out. Really, that to me is like a major massive cop-out, man. Pain and suffering, okay, I can understand like we do bad things to each other, but what about natural disasters? What about like kids being born with like genetic health problems, and like as well as like if you look at the the Bible and the Quran as well, you see like the Abrahamic God, he commands genocide himself, and he conducts genocides and conducts atrocities himself. So how does that come into all of this? It doesn't make, to me, that makes absolutely no sense. That makes literally no sense to me, man. That like if you look at the because it's not just about us human beings, we do bad things to each other. There's like a lot of different like cases, specifically if you look at the again Bible, Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, how does that come into this? Sodom and Gomorrah and all these other issues like that, and Noah's flood and all that type of stuff, man. How does that come into this? And also you got like there's also like again like natural disasters, the fact that there's like so many different sorts of like issues. It's not just about like the biggest counter argument I know of, like especially for the pain problem of evil and pain and suffering, is typically people would present you the argument that it's all because of the fact that we as human beings, we have free will, and we of our own free will we can decide to like do bad things, and we can decide to like to do good things, and it's all because of our free will, and henceforth that's why the problem of suffering and pain and evil is not that bad, because we have our free will, and we can, of our own free will, we can choose to do good, or we can choose to do evil and whatever. The problem of like pain and suffering and all that type of stuff, the biggest counter argument to this type of issue is that people will say, oh, free will, we have free will, henceforth we can choose. It's not because of it's not because of the fact that God causes us pain and suffering on purpose for no reason. It's because we have free will and we can choose, and some of us we choose to use our free will for evil, and some of us we choose to use our free will for good. It's all because of free will. The free will argument really falls short so horribly, guys. The free will argument falls short so horribly, guys. If you really think about the fact that there's so much like pain and suffering that is beyond our own control. Certainly think about like think about like natural disasters, kids being born with like genetic health issues and problems and etc. And I can keep going on and on. There's like so much like pain and suffering that is beyond our own like agency and control. So like that type of counter argument that the reason pain and suffering and evil exists is because of the fact that us human beings, we have our own free will, and that's the reason, and we choose to use our free will for evil and bad deeds. And that doesn't make any logical sense. That only accounts for like a small amount of pain and suffering. There's also like natural disasters, kids being born with genetic health issues. Even in the Bible, God himself instigates, causes pain and suffering on purpose, like again Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. Again, the biblical God tells the Israelites to genocide the Amalekites. That's not because of free will. That's the biblical God commanding for genocide himself and all that type of stuff. So it's not just about like free will. It's not just about free will and all that type of stuff, man. There's like all these other instances as well in the Bible where God, of his own like omniscient knowledge, it's like all-knowing, caring, powerful God, commands genocide himself, which doesn't kind of add up to me. These types of arguments about like these sorts of arguments. So the problem of evil, pain and suffering, why is there like so many different sorts of messed up things? The only type of counter argument people have to this is that, oh well, free will, and that is so stupid to me. It's so like that only the free will count, that's like the only type of counter argument most people, religious people, will tell you about like the problem of pain and suffering and evil. The reason evil and pain and suffering exist is because we have free will. And even the fact that like I don't even think that we actually do even have free will, because if you look at the Bible, there's like a lot of different like implications suggesting the fact that actually everything's kind of already predetermined. Like look at like the story of Joseph. Like he was like thrown into prison and he was like given visions. Like think about the whole thing about prophecy and visions and all that, like things like in the future something's going to happen and it's all predetermined by God. So does that kind of debunk any type of free will? So you know, in Islam you got qadar, which is like predestination. So free will is like kind of like nonsensical then, doesn't it? Kind of becomes like very much nonsensically absurd if you think about it like that. But the problem of evil and suffering is such an important issue to think about. It's so important that you carefully contemplate on this, because like if the Abrahamic God is actually allows for like so much pain and suffering and evil for no legitimate reason, then wouldn't that suggest that he might be malevolent and not trustworthy? That's like something that a lot of religious people don't really want to come to terms with, specifically Christians, Muslims, Jews, obviously. The problem of evil and suffering, obviously it relates to the Abrahamic faith, obviously. I think maybe perhaps a couple other like religions, maybe perhaps mostly like the Abrahamic faith. Still, guys, think about this. The pain and suffering and evil, there's like so much of it. It's not just about like us human beings doing bad things to each other. Think about like natural disasters. Think about like kids being born with genetic health problems and disease and all that type of stuff. And even in the Bible, Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, which is also in the Quran as well. So like it's not just about us deliberately causing harm to each other based off our own free will, but there's also like other issues outside of our control that causes like pain and suffering, man, including like God's own like commandments as well, which is kind of funny. God's own judgment, like Noah's flood on Sodom and Gomorrah, that is like the biblical God, the Abrahamic God, just decided that was the best course of action in those types of scenarios, was to wipe out all life on earth and to cause like genocide and harm to people. So that's kind of funny, isn't that funny? But think about the problem of evil and suffering, guys. It's so important to think about it. It's like such an important moral dilemma. It's a big fat issue, man, for the Abrahamic faith specifically, especially Christianity. I'm not too sure about Islam, because in Islam I don't think God's claimed to be all loving, but I know in Christianity he's definitely claimed to be all loving, caring, forgiving. So why would he, in Noah's, like in the story of Noah's flood, why would he like just wipe out all life on earth, kill like millions of human beings? And Sodom and Gomorrah, he would like cause pain and suffering to like people, supposedly because of the fact that they were like kind of on the queer side. That's kind of a little bit, to me, seems like very petty. There's like so many different issues, man, with the Abrahamic faith, man. I swear, it's very, once you actually carefully read the Bible and the Quran and the Torah as well, the Tanakh, it's very, very hard not to see the Abrahamic God as being kind of a little bit malevolent. It's very difficult, guys, especially if we look at things from this like very 21st century perspective. Like we look at things from like our in a very humanitarian way. It seems like the Bible is like just like freaking extremely primitive and atrocious, man, I swear. the problem of evil and suffering. The reason why there's so much suffering and pain is because free will. Even though, like, think about natural disasters, genetic health issues, and problems like that. Like, what kind of counter argument is that? Like, free will, that's like the only counter argument, but it doesn't even add up to me, because I don't even think, if you look at the Bible, I don't think we even have really a total amount of free will anyway. I think that a lot of it's like already predetermined based off God's plan. How can God have a plan if we have free will? It all falls apart so quickly, man, I swear. It's like so nonsensically stupid to me. The problem of like evil and suffering is so legitimate, guys. It's such a massive dilemma, but so many, like, especially like Muslims, Christians, Jews, they haven't come to terms with it, guys. It's so difficult to answer for it. It's probably one of the most like serious issues regarding the Abrahamic faiths. How can like an all-loving, all-caring, good God allow for like so much pain and suffering in our world? It just doesn't add up. And people say free will, but like some there's like a lot of pain and suffering that is like beyond our own like agency. Certainly like natural disasters, kids being born with genetic health issues and problems. Even in the Bible, the Abrahamic God commands genocide, conducts genocide himself, Noah's flood and Sodom and Gomorrah, even in the Quran. So the free will, that counter argument doesn't hold up in any water. It doesn't hold any water. It doesn't hold up in any way. There's like so many different issues, man. The problem of like evil and suffering, how can you possibly answer for it? It just doesn't logically make any sense to me, man. The problem of evil and suffering, I don't think there's any proper way to counteract the problem of suffering and evil and all that type of stuff. I think it's all about like, I don't think you can properly like counteract it at all. The problem of like suffering and evil and all that, how can you counteract it, man? It's like such a serious like dilemma, but there's no like real way to answer for it. It's such a serious issue, man, but I don't think you can actually properly answer for it at all. It's like such a serious like problem. The whole thing about like pain and suffering, how do you like, and some people say it's because of like the fact that we have like free will. I don't even think that the free will counter, it's like, that's like even like a proper counter argument. Because I don't even think that we have like a total amount of like free will anyway. If you think about it, everything is like, how can like God have a plan if we have free will? That doesn't make any logical sense. So, you know, in that type of way, I think it all just kind of falls apart. Honestly, I do think it really starts to, like, the Abrahamic faiths start to fall apart. I'm in this like very scenically nice park-like environment. Love making videos here, guys. Such a nice place to film videos. The problem of evil and suffering is such an important like dilemma to think about, guys. How can an all-loving, all-powerful, good God cause like so much like untold amounts of suffering for no legitimate reason? Some people say, well, free will, that we choose to do bad things based off our free will, and so that's why evil and pain and suffering exists. And that only explains a small amount of it. That's like, think about natural disasters and kids being born with like genetic health issues. And again, if you look at the Bible, God himself commands and allows for genocide on purpose. If like, again, Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, 1 Samuel 15:3, the biblical Abrahamic God tells the Israelites to genocide the Amalekites. That is not because of our own free will. That is that is like the Abrahamic God's own judgment and commandments, and judgment is kind of messed up in so many different types of ways. The problem of suffering and evil, guys, is so legitimate. It's not just because, oh, we have free will. That's why evil and pain and suffering exists. That's so nonsensically stupid, because there's so much like there's like a lot of pain and suffering that it doesn't relate to our free will in any type of way. Think about natural disasters, hurricanes, kids being born with genetic health issues and problems. How does that relate to us having free will? It doesn't make any logical sense. There's like so much like so many different sorts of issues with our world, guys. Do you think that's just because of the fact that we have like, it's because of free will, that's why there's so much pain and suffering, guys? Do you really think that? Do you really think that's like a justifiable like explanation for all of the pain and suffering? Man, it's so like, so many like, certainly Christian apologetics, they've been trying to figure it out, but it's like, it can't be answered for, in my opinion. The problem of like suffering and pain and evil and all that, it just cannot be like explained away so easily in such a concise way. I don't think so. I don't really think so, guys. I don't think it can be explained away in such a proper way, man. I don't think it's such an easy thing to explain away. It's like so like dubiously tricky, man. How can you explain it away in such the problem of like suffering and evil and all that type of stuff? Like there's like so much like pain and suffering and misery. Oh, but it's because we choose to do bad things. What about like natural disasters and kids being born with like genetic health problems and issues like that? How do you explain that sort of suffering? You can't. That's why this like issue is so serious, guys. It's such a serious problem to think about. The problem of like suffering and evil and all that type of stuff, like because it really does relate to the fact that like if certainly Christianity, God is claimed to be all loving, caring about us and everything like that, but why is there like pain and suffering, man? Why do kids get born with genetic health issues and problems, disease and all that stuff? Why do all these sorts of things exist in our world to begin with? Why were we even made with the capacity to experience pain and suffering to begin with? Isn't that that's actually a lot more interesting to think about? That the Abrahamic God created us on purpose. Like we have like the capacity to experience pain and suffering. Isn't that kind of pointless? Like imagine if I was like some type of scientist and I was like creating something in like a lab, and I create like, wouldn't it be better? There was like an organism I was trying to build and make. That organism, think about it, wouldn't it just be like, imagine if I like that organism, imagine if I made that organism, like, wouldn't it be better if I just the capacity to experience pain and suffering, that wasn't even that, I didn't even make that, I didn't even put that into the organism to begin with. The organism can only experience pleasure and pain. Wouldn't that be, I mean, pleasure and bliss, not pain at all? Wouldn't that be a better scenario? That's why to me it's like such a weird thing that we can experience pain and suffering to begin with. That wouldn't like an all-loving, caring God certainly not allow for that to begin with, to even begin with. Like us, why would an all-loving, caring God engineer us, build us with the capacity to experience pain and suffering to begin with? That's kind of like, so that to me suggests that it was all done on purpose. That we were, if the Abrahamic God's actually real, I think that we were made to suffer on purpose, guys, which is kind of a little bit sadistic and psychopathic. Because think about it, an all-loving, caring God would create us with the capacity to experience pain and suffering. Guys, does that add up? Does that make any logical sense? I don't think so. To me, that would suggest that the Abrahamic God is like quite malevolent and evil then. Because imagine again, I'm like a scientist, I'm in a laboratory and there's like I'm trying to build like an organism. Wouldn't it be better if that organism doesn't have any capacity to experience pain to begin with? Wouldn't it be very sinister and psychopathic of me to like make that organism have this like ability to like experience tremendous amounts of pain? That to me suggests that a lot of people would say, well, you need to experience pain. Is that if you only had pleasure, you would not even understand what pleasure is. You need to have a balance of things. So pain and suffering, like it allows us to have a good understanding of like all these different sorts of things. But to me, it seems like, again, weirdly cop out, because God's omnipotent. So pain and suffering just in general didn't have to exist. But I don't know, perhaps it just, to me, it seems to me like that the Abrahamic God is probably very much malevolent. I don't know, psychopathic, because pain and suffering, how can you explain that away? How can you, what kind of like explanation is there for the pain and suffering? Why were we even made to experience pain and suffering to begin with? It's like it almost seems like very deliberate, in my opinion, that we were like engineered and built, and everything was set up in such a way that we were like made to suffer on purpose. I don't know. It's very difficult to come to terms with this. Some people will say that, well, it's just all a part of God's plan. You just need to have faith. And perhaps maybe you're right. Maybe I'm being kind of a little bit too like cynical. I don't know. Too skeptical, I don't know, too like serious about this. The problem of suffering and evil is so important though, guys, that you try and like contemplate on this type of this very important like philosophical dilemma. This philosophical dilemma, guys, you contemplate on it, you think about it very carefully. Problem of suffering and evil and pain. An all-loving, caring God would allow for like so much pain and suffering. It's, to me, I don't know, does that really add up? And think about this so carefully. We were deliberately made to experience pain and suffering to begin with. It's like we were like engineered for pain and suffering. Imagine again, like I was a scientist in a laboratory. There was an organism, I was building an organism. Wouldn't it be better if I didn't give the organism any pain receptors at all? It couldn't even experience pain and suffering to begin with. Wouldn't an all-loving, caring God do that, like create like his creation without the pain, without the capacity to experience pain and suffering? To me, if you look at the Bible and the Quran carefully, it would appear to me to be the case that everything was like sort of set up for man to suffer. And I think we were deliberately like just made to suffer basically. And I think that is like the only way you could explain the whole like the sort of like moral dilemma of the problem of suffering and evil, that we were basically just made to suffer, man, and stuff like that. We were made to suffer on purpose and all of that stuff. Pretty much, I think so, guys. I think we were made to suffer on purpose, man. Now, I think that's the only sort of like way you could possibly rationalize it. The pain and suffering dilemma. Think about it, we were like deliberately like engineered with the capacity to experience pain and suffering on purpose. That to me, wouldn't that suggest wouldn't that mean that God made everything on purpose so that we would suffer and experience pain? Isn't that kind of a little bit weird? Think about it. I'm a scientist in a laboratory. There's an organism. If I was like an all-caring, loving scientist and I was like very benevolent, why would I make that organism have pain receptors to begin with? Wouldn't it be better if I just engineered that organism, right, in a way that it would not have any type of like ability to experience pain and suffering? To me, it doesn't make any logical sense, man. That to me like suggests the fact that like, I feel like I think so that the Abrahamic God's likely malevolent, guys. I think so. I cannot like unsee like all the cruelty in the Bible, guys. I've read the Bible carefully 2 times over, and I read the Quran a lot of like almost countless dozen times. You cannot unsee the cruelty, guys. Like Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's flood. There's all that cruelty. How can you? A lot of religious people, they're so blind to it. How can you like explain that away? Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's flood. There's so much cruelty, man, in the Bible and the Quran. I just cannot explain. An all-loving, caring, knowledgeable God would like command genocide, conduct genocide himself. Wouldn't that suggest that he's like malevolent in some way? Like the mental gymnastics a lot of like Abrahamic people, Christians, Muslims do to like explain away the problem of evil and suffering and pain. It's so extraordinary. The problem of evil, suffering, it cannot be such an important like moral dilemma to think about, man. It's such an important moral issue and dilemma to think about, to contemplate on. The whole thing about the problem of suffering and evil and all that kind of stuff. How can you possibly try and like explain it away in such a mundane way? It doesn't make any logical sense to me, man. It's so like weird. How can you, all the cruelty in the Bible and the Quran, it just you can't really unsee it, man. It's so like weird. There's like so many different sorts of issues, man. It's like so difficult to just ignore it, which is, it's like a massive elephant in the room, like especially regarding like any type of like religious discussions. The biggest elephant in the room is like the problem of evil, suffering, the cruelty in the Bible. Man, it seems to me that if you look at the Bible and the Quran, it's everything like about our world. Everything was just set up for pain and suffering to exist on purpose. And I think that is like kind of hard to like answer for, in my opinion. Imagine if I was like some type of scientist. I was in a laboratory. There was like an organism. Wouldn't it be better if I just like, the organism, I didn't give it any capacity to experience pain. It didn't have any pain receptors in its like anatomy structure. That's what I couldn't experience pain to begin with. Wouldn't that be a lot better? And wouldn't an all-loving, benevolent creator do that for his like a creation, to not give it any type of capacity to experience pain and suffering? The fact that we do experience pain and suffering, to me, that would suggest that if there is like such a creator God, that he probably is like more amoral, it's probably not like benevolent, caring, loving at all. That's the only way you could possibly solve this type of dilemma and moral issue. And the moral problem, well, it's not really a moral problem, but it's just like a typical like problem, like the problem of pain and suffering. Not really evil, obviously. Problem of evil, but like so it's like what? How do you define evil? It's like a little bit dubious. Pain and suffering, that's a lot more specific. That's what this really kind of boils down to anyway. But it's like so tremendous, the pain and suffering in this world. How can you possibly just like brush it off? Oh, we have free will. What about natural disasters and earthquakes and kids being born with genetic health problems? And even in the Bible, the Abrahamic God tells the Israelites to kill the Amalekites and conducts genocides. You got Noah's flood in Sodom and Gomorrah. How can that? You can't, like, the free will argument doesn't really apply to that, does it? So, to me, at least in my opinion, I think that the problem of evil, pain and suffering, that is like such a massive, tremendous like a dilemma that cannot be answered for, in my opinion. It's inconceivable to try and answer for it, to try and like debunk the problem of like evil and pain and suffering, man. It's such a tremendous, like, it's like such an extraordinary dilemma. I think that you cannot like come to terms with it at all. You got like, again, you got Noah's flood, you got Sodom and Gomorrah. That is like the Abrahamic God doing genocide and killing people on purpose for no reason. That's like so nonsensical. It's kind of like, it seems like very absurd, man. It actually does seem like very absurd, man. To me, it seems like it's all like made up. Seems like it's like very absurd. You can't come to terms with it, man. How can you possibly ignore like all the cruelty in the Bible? So many like Christians, they do that, and Muslims and Jews as well. They ignore like the cruelty in the Bible and the Quran. How can you turn a blind eye to that, man? It's so, you'd have to be mentally handicapped, honestly, 100% so. And I've been trying to like struggle with this for such a long time now, because honestly I've been trying to find faith, to believe in God again. Obviously, I think everybody needs to like have like some type of like spirituality in their lives. But if you look at the Bible and the Quran, it's like so like there's like so much cruelty that's like so hard to answer for. It's not just about free will. That's like such a cop-out excuse, man. That's such a horrible cop-out. More free will. How can you? What about like natural disasters? Kids like with genetic health problems and issues, all those other sorts of issues. Where does the free will come into that, man? Free will, that doesn't make any law. That doesn't apply to like natural disasters, earthquakes, kids being born with like diabetes and cancer, and even in the Bible, like, you know, like Abraham commands and conducts genocide himself on purpose. You got Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, all that cruelty for no real reason, basically, because an all-powerful God could have chosen to do, like, think about Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. All the people were wicked, but God could have like, figured some other type of way out, because he's all-powerful, all-knowing, all-capable. Why did he have to choose genocide and murder? The mental gymnastics, guys, that a lot of Christians, Muslims, Jews do is like so insane, man. It doesn't make any logical sense to me, man. The mental gymnastics are so like insane. They're so extraordinary. You can't possibly make sense of it, man. You can't possibly make sense of it. Like the mental gymnastics, there's no way you can freaking solve the problem of evil, pain and suffering, this type of moral dilemma. It's like so serious that you must contemplate on it, guys. Don't just like not consider it. It's like the biggest elephant in the room regarding like Christian, Islamic, Muslim, Abrahamic, Jew theology. It's like such a big fat it's like a massive it's like such a big fat elephant in the room, man. You have to think about it, contemplate on it. Don't just like dismiss this some problem of evil, dilemma, whatever you want to call it. So freaking serious, man. You can't like freaking just ignore it, turn a blind eye. It's like so like it's such a serious like dilemma, problem, whatever you want to call it. You can't just turn a blind eye, guys. You gotta think about it so carefully and deeply, man. I swear it's so important that you think about this so carefully and deeply. The problem of evil, suffering, man. You can't like just ignore the cruelty in the Bible and the Quran, man. I just can't. It's hard to. You have to look at it, man. You can't ignore it. So many people, Christians, Muslims, they turn a blind eye to it. I can't, honestly, 100%. I can't just like turn a blind eye. The problem of evil and suffering, guys, is such a serious issue, man. Because if the Abrahamic God's actually evil, or like malevolent and doesn't really care about us too much, like you can't really like expect him to treat you well. I guess he probably is just gonna torture you forever. Imagine, that's what I always thought when I was little. I thought that I always had this like belief that actually, you know, like when we die, everybody goes to hell. There's no like, heaven is like a trick, basically. Everybody goes to hell. That's why I always thought, and then we just get tortured forever in hell. Actually, I thought that when I was like a lot younger. Even I still think so now. I think that heaven basically is like God's way of tricking us into thinking he's like a good guy. But actually, guys, he's evil and malevolent, and basically when we die, everybody goes to hell and we all get tortured for eternity. And this place is just like God trying to like give us like some type of relief from pain and suffering, because he's like psychopathic. And then later on when we die, we all just go to hellfire and we get tortured forever in eternity, and heaven's just like a ruse, a trick to like convince us that he's benevolent and caring and merciful. So, to me, it's like so it's so wildly insane. It's so insane, man. the problem of like evil and suffering, how that moral dilemma, and you can't turn a blind eye to like the cruelty in the Bible and the Quran, Noah's flood story and all that. You got Noah's flood story and there's like Sodom and Gomorrah. There's all these other sorts of issues as well. How can you turn a blind eye to that, man? It's so insane. I don't think there's any way to answer for it, the problem of suffering, evil, pain, and well, if I think about it very carefully though, and I think that's about it, guys.